In my opinion, virtual consultations are here to stay, and today's video, I'm gonna share with you what I think is a great structure for it to guide you to success. Hey everybody, I'm Mike Claudio, owner of WinRate Consulting and host of the Big Stud Sales Podcast. And today I want to talk to you a lot about my background in the virtual consultation and helping my clients start to get wins in an environment that is incredibly unknown and kind of new to a lot of people on our side and the client side. So sales, marketing, and business development is what this channel is all about. If that's something you want to learn more about on a consistent basis, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're alerted anytime I release a new video. One of the biggest challenges in doing virtual consultations is understanding the scope around the measurements and size of what's going to happen. So the first step, in my opinion, that you need to do is send some sort of a prerequisite email asking the client to do some measurements, some pictures, some ideas, and get them thinking about things to get you a package of information prior to the actual call, so that helps the call go a lot smoother. Because seeing the client walking around their house trying to take measurements is not going to be effective for you or for them, and it's gonna make it feel very choppy. Having that information ahead of time will help you guide a consistent meeting throughout the entire call. So just like an in-person meeting, it's incredibly important to break the ice and build rapport. In my in-home consultation advice, I always say, ask a question, give a compliment, and get them talking about themselves. The best way to do that is to ask them about their decision timeline, players, and interests. Basically understanding why they're making a decision, when they plan to make it, and what they're gonna use to base their final decision on. This allows you to collect a lot of information that you can use on the back end when helping deliver your proposal and overcoming objections. Because if you can really get to the root cause and reasons and people involved in their decision-making process, you turn into a consultant as opposed to just a transactional salesperson. Also, similar to the in-home, we've all had clients take control of the meeting. They can talk about what's going on in their life, in their world, and things that have nothing to do with why you're there. So it's incredibly important to set an agenda and also have a hard stop. I think 45 to 60 minutes for an initial virtual consultation is enough time, as long as you're guiding them through the process along the way. We're gonna get into some of those steps in a minute, but ultimately, once you've built the rapport, you need to set the agenda for the meeting. One of the most important parts of that is getting their buy-in. Once you set the agenda, simply saying, does that work for you? And is there anything you'd like to add to that? It allows them to be part of the conversation and part of the decision-making, which makes it seem like more of a team approach, as opposed to you just guiding a meeting and never giving them a chance to have their input on what is and is not going to be covered in this conversation that you're having via virtual technology. Once you set the agenda and have gotten their buy-in, it's incredibly important to understand what problem they're looking to solve, why that problem's so important to them, and what they're willing to invest to make it happen. Strictly saying, hey, what is the biggest thing you think that I can help you solve? Why is solving that so important to you? And then if that problem's so important, what are you willing to invest to solve it? And this can work for any type of sales conversation, because ultimately, emotion drives action. So if they're not having an emotional problem with something they're dealing with, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to guide them to a decision to pay you what you're worth. And in this scenario, I do like using investment as opposed to what's your budget, because investment signifies a return, where a budget is more related to an expense, and people don't like spending money unnecessarily. So it's really important to understand the root of the problem they're trying to solve, why it's so important, and then trying to understand their monetary investment level so that you can guide them to a proper solution for their budget range as part of the scope conversation. So when you're going through the scope conversation of what they're looking for and the quantities and the values and how much of this and how much of that, what you're trying to accomplish is get enough information to give them a range or price on the spot. As you're collecting that data, ideally that prerequisite email got you some of that information ahead of time so you can be prepared. But even if you're not, giving them some sort of an educated guess range as part of that is the goal of the scope collection. there's gonna be a lot of things with color selection and variables that may not impact price. Try to keep this part of it to the information that's necessary for you to determine some sort of a price range or fixed price if you can, what you sell will get you there. Because really what you're trying to uncover and what you want is to get them to give you a small deposit to schedule the next step of an in-person consultation. Many contractors out there charge for the estimation and design process. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But if you're gonna do a virtual consultation, what you're trying to protect is your time. What you don't wanna do is drive out there, get there, and then realize this isn't a job for me, or they don't have a right budget, or they're not really bought into us. Because that's what we're trying to avoid, is spending time with people unnecessarily. It's the unfortunate reality. You only have so much time in a day. There's only so many good clients that you can help. This virtual consultation allows you to figure that out. So if you get a scope organized from them with enough quantities and values and selections that you can give them some sort of a price. It could just be a deposit on the design process, but as small as even a 10% of the range to get them bought into working with you. Not everybody's gonna do it, and I'm not sure you need to push for it unless you want to, but I think it needs to be presented as the obvious next step. Hey, based on this scope, with what I understand from what you want to do, I think it's going to be between $5,000 and $8,000. What I'd like to do today is collect a 10% deposit on the low end of that to just lock us into an in-person consultation whenever we get to schedule that. It's $500, and if they're not willing to give you that, it's likely they're not really ready to buy from you. So not only does it uncover an objection, but it also allows you to protect your time to know that they're actually bought in. So when you're going over the scope conversation, it's okay to even say, hey, let's stick to the items that are going to drive the price. Some of the final selections we can talk about at the end of the conversation, but I want to get a great understanding of what the range is going to be so that you're educated on what is and is not possible for that investment level that you said you were willing to spend. All right, so you've gotten to the point where they've agreed or disagreed to the deposit. Either way, you decide if you're ready to move forward or not. But regardless, the last thing you need to do on this call is to set next steps and define who owns that step and what's the deadline on it. Because you may need some additional information to take your next step, or it might just be, hey, here's how we're gonna contact you to schedule the in-person measurement and consultation. But ultimately, they need to know what to expect, and you need to set proper expectations, which definitely levels up the overall professionalism of the experience of working with you, but also keeps everybody on the same page as to what is going to happen and when it needs to happen by. Once you've done all that, the last step, in my opinion, is when the call's done, is to send a follow-up email. It might have a calendar invite for when that next meeting is going to happen, but it should outline their priorities, their decision timelines, their scope, their budget range, maybe a receipt for the deposit, maybe an expectation of, hey, once this next step happens, the deposit will be due. But ultimately, that last email or that end email that recaps the entire conversation is a phenomenal tool for you to use to differentiate yourself, but then also use it for follow-ups and holding them and yourself accountable to the details of that long term, because we've all had those situations where you get halfway into a project and they're like, well, I never said that, and you have the recourse to say, hey, look, in this email that we, after our first conversation, this is what we agreed to. And sometimes clients just forget. They're not trying to take advantage of you, they just forget the conversation because it might have been weeks or months ago. So the more you can document that part of the process on the initial consultation, I think it's incredibly valuable. That being said, if you're using Zoom, it may be in your interest to record that meeting. With that recording, you can use it for recapping information, but one of the biggest benefits I've seen from recording it is likely all decision makers are not going to be on that call. You can give them access to that recording so that the other person, the spouse or somebody else that's involved in the decision making, can also watch the conversation so they can get your feedback directly from you. One of the worst things you can do is let somebody tell your story for you, because they cannot articulate or differentiate you the way that you can. So recording that meeting, that virtual consultation, I think is a huge asset that you can use for long-term value with differentiating yourself and giving yourself the best chance to close that deal. All right, guys, so that's my recap on what I think a great virtual consultation looks like. If you have any questions, comment below, but ultimately I have a question for you. Have you done a virtual consultation? And if so, what is the single best practice you've learned so that we can all educate ourselves and help each other, because we've all learned this new trick, learned this new asset, and I want to help as many people as possible figure that out. So what is the number one thing you've learned by doing virtual consultations on your own? All right, guys, thank you so much for watching it. I'm Mike Claudio with WinRate Consulting. I'd love for you to subscribe and engage with me on this channel. Obviously, I have other platforms that you can engage with as well, on Instagram at WinRate Consulting, and my podcast, Big Stud Sales. Ultimately, I want to get in touch with you and I want to help you. So please engage with me, please subscribe, and don't forget to win fast and win often.